Good morning everyone and welcome back to the garage. I am here with Kieran, also known as Garden Weirdo.
That's someone else, that's definitely someone else.
The Kawasaki GT750. Now, I was riding the other day and right towards the end of my ride I lost all brake pressure on the rear brake. Now, being the expert rider that I am, it didn't cause me any problems and I managed to get home okay, but...
Did you fill your pants?
A little bit. We are going to be removing the rear caliper on this today and investigating what that problem is and what we might need to do to fix it. So, lovely sunny day, we'll just crack straight on. Right, here's my caliper then. And when I got back I had a little bit of a look around this, and all down here on the carrier was wet with brake fluid, so something is leaking somewhere. So what we're just going to do is take the whole thing off and investigate it properly. To do that we're going to have to remove these two here, and they are 12mm, and we're going to take the hose off there, that's also 12mm. Now some brake fluid is going to come out of there, so we're going to have to find something to collect that with, and we're not going to get that on our hands or any paintwork because it's horrible stuff and that's best avoided. So I'll get some tools and we'll get on with that. Anyway, there we go, there's the caliper lifted off, and we're going to take that into the garage now and investigate a little bit and see what we can find. Right, okay, so we're just having a look at the caliper itself, which looks a little bit crusty, a little bit funky. I do ride this bike all year round, and I'll be honest, I don't do a lot of preventative maintenance on it. So there you can see it is slightly crusty. But anyway, that's not the problem at this point, but it's worth looking at while we've got the caliper off. So, here in the middle is the piston which pushes against the brake pads. And here is like a dust boot, and then behind there is a square cut seal which keeps the brake fluid on that side of the piston. Now, we did notice straight off the bat that this dust boot seems to be sitting a little bit further forward than it should do. There is, or should be, a groove back there that sits in.
Like a jazz groove, gonna get funky.
A mellow funk groove, but it was not in there, so that's something, but not really the issue either. So we're going to remove the piston and the dust boot and the square cut seal and just have a proper look at everything that's going on. This next step then gets a little bit explosive, and you will need a piece of wood that's about this thick, which lives in there, and one of these jobbies which is connected to a compressor. And what we're going to do is we're going to fire compressed air down here, which is going to force the piston out in that direction, and the bit of wood is there to stop it flying off into the distance. And a word of warning, don't put your finger there and then do this, because when that pops out, sometimes they pop out with a massive amount of force and you will shatter your finger. So take care at this next stage.
Right, well, seeing as I'm the less vital element here, I'm going to be doing the dangerous work, so let's see what occurs. Fingers. Ooh.
Pop. So yeah, that one came out pretty nicely, and that is what that now looks like. You can see that groove where the dust boot should sit. So let's investigate further. At this stage then, we should just be able to pull this piston out with a little bit of wiggling and jiggling. So let's see what happens there. Oh, it's time for tea. There we are.
Get out of it.
So there's your piston, and this is what we're going to investigate. Right then, I've just come back outside to have a little look at the piston, and what I'm checking for is any pitting, any rust that might be causing issues with the seal. If it's got a big pitted hole in it, then potentially the fluid can leak through underneath the seal effectively. Even though the seal's fine, it can go get past it, but it does appear to be fine. It's a little bit dirty, but that's to be expected, but it will clean up, and there's no rusting and no pitting, so I'm happy enough with the piston. Right then, next up is the dust boot. We're going to just pull that out. It's not held in with anything other than just a little groove.
And crusty brake fluid.
And just sort of have a look around there for any holes, any rips, anything like that. This is not keeping the fluid in, by the way, it's just keeping the dust out. But if it does have holes in it, then the dust and other crap can get in and damage the seal. But again, that does seem alright. I'll have a proper look when I'm not filming that, but that does seem to be okay. In here then, you can see this little black ring that goes all the way around. That's the square cut seal, and that's what holds the brake fluid on the right side of the piston. We're going to take that out and have a look, but just on preliminary inspection, it does seem to be okay. So the mystery thickens, plot thickens, mystery develops.
All of the things.
Mystery, thicken, plot development. But so we'll take it out and have a look, but at the minute it seems okay. Shut up, dog! Why are you so noisy? Noisy dog. What are you doing? What are you doing? Get away. Here we are then, just using a small pick to try and get carefully behind that seal to just prise that out. I'm trying not to damage it because there's a possibility I might be able to reuse it. Now, I've tried doing that before and ended up having to buy a new one, so we'll see, but as it is, let's have a look at this one. We've just been having a look then at this square cut seal, and my initial thoughts were that it might be entirely broken or ripped or nicked or something that would allow the fluid to get past it, but it does appear to be in good condition. So the plot mystery device thing does thicken, and we're just wondering what it could be. If we're assuming that that's okay, then there's nothing strictly wrong with the caliper. So what the possible solution to this might be is that the banjo union bolt, or whatever thing it's called, might have somehow worked its way slightly loose and allowed some of the fluid to get out. So I think all we can do really is put all this back together, having cleaned it, and refill it with brake fluid and see what happens. So I've just cleaned that caliper up a little bit using some brake cleaner and a toothbrush on the inside at least, so as not to score the barrel where the piston sits. And on the caliper body itself, I just used a wire brass brush just to clean off some of the road salt and all that rubbish. So now we're going to put the square cut seal back, and to do that it's a case of lubricating it with clean brake fluid and sitting it back in its little groove there, and then we've got the dust seal and the piston to put back on, so let's give it a go. Here we go then. Kieran's just lubricating my ring. And then we're going to stick it back in the caliper. In she goes then. It's just a case of working it into the slot, which is self-evident when you're looking at it, and making sure that it's all nicely in there and not twisted.
Are you still talking about seals and stuff here?
Well, I am. What are you talking about?
Never mind.
Okay, moving on then. That is in there nicely, not jangled, not messed up, just how it should be. So the easiest way to get all this back together is to put the dust seal onto the piston first. So that's what Kieran's doing there, as you can see, just working that round so that it sits into its groove. And once you've done that, you can offer it up to the caliper itself, and we'll show you how to get that fitted in. The dust boot then is now sat in the groove where it would sit in its final placement, and to get that whole contraption now back into the caliper, we're going to move that boot down a little bit, and it's really slippy, it wants to come off the other end, but we're just going to move it down nearer to the bottom for now, which will allow us a little bit of free rubber here, which we can sit into the groove on the caliper. So let's have a go. Here we are then. So the dust boot is a little bit loose off the bottom, and it's a case of sitting this little lip into the corresponding groove on the caliper. Corresponding groove, do you remember that? We did decide that would be a good name for a band.
Absolutely. If it didn't already exist.
Oh, does it exist?
I don't know.
Oh.
Google.
So it is a fiddly business trying to get that lip into the groove, and it might take a little while, so we're just going to do that and get back to you in a second. We think we've got that in place then now, so the lip is sat into the caliper. Obviously the piston's still wobbling about because it's not in there, but what we can do now is push the piston into the caliper, and that should slide back past that square cut seal, and by pushing it all the way in, it will push the dust boot up into the groove at the top of the piston where it needs to be. This is all very groovy and very pistony, and I hope you get the idea. So there we are, that's what that should look like, and you can see that the dust boot is now sat where it should do. So now we just got to put it back on the bike. Before we do that though, we are going to investigate whether any brake fluid got onto the disc and the pads. So we're going to take the pads out and give those a little inspection, a bit of a clean, and then we're just going to run some brake clean out all around the disc to make sure there's nothing on there which is going to stop me from braking.
Stop you from stopping?
Stop me from stopping. That one just pulls out then, and the one at the back just does the same. So we're going to clean them up, stick them back on. I've just been cleaning up these pads and discovered that they are more or less toast. They're out of friction material, so it's probably a good job I was in here anyway, because we are going on tour, aren't we, in a few weeks, so I probably need some brakes. Anyway, if you're interested, the number on the back of that is Toyo C93FF, and then below that it says 90601 Tokiko. So I shall order some more of those, and I'll check the front pads before I order them, because might need some of those as well. But anyway, we'll continue this job as if these are new pads and get this buttoned up. So while Kieran cleans up down below, I've just put a little bit of copper slip on the back of the pads. This one is in a round formation where it touches the back of the piston, and then this has got like the two little fingers of copper slip where it touches the caliper itself. Let's put this brake pad back in then, and it's just a case of sitting it in there really. There is a little shim just here, and this section has to sit on top of the shim, and there's one on the other side as well, so they just sit on top like that. Simple as that really. Just push it against the disc, making sure not to get a copper slip on your disc.
Don't get copper on your stopper.
And then it's just the same on the other side really. Right, we've got the pads on the disc, and so now the caliper has to slot over the top. It's as you might expect, it just sits over there, and then you put the bolts back in. So we'll put the two here first, and then we'll do the Union Banjo full string quartet, wherever it is at the bottom. We're just about to put this Union bolt back on. So there is the bolt and a washer, and then it comes up through, and then there's another washer, and then it fits into the caliper itself. I've just been having a look in the manual for the torque setting for these, and they are all the same, and they are 22 pounds-foot of torque. So we're probably going to measure that now. Right, this one's now 22 pounds-foot, and before we do the caliper mounting bolts themselves, we're going to put some fluid back in the system. We're going to pump out the piston so that the brake pads sit against the disc, and then when that is happening, then we'll tighten these down. So we're going to go up to the reservoir now, put some fluid in. The brake fluid reservoir lives behind that side panel on this side of the bike, and I don't know about yours, but on mine it's a little bit of a faff to get the lid off, so we think we might have to take the reservoir off with that bolt just to pull it out and get the top off. Bah, Kawasaki. There we are then, off it comes.
Oh, it's empty, John.
Is it empty?
What are the chances of that?
Oh, that's a surprise. You're right, it is empty. So we've just taken the little rubber piece and the plastic piece out. Is that a moth on there?
No, just some debris.
Oh, it looks just like a moth. Anyway, that is empty, so we're going to put some fluid in there. I'm just going to do this to the minimum mark to start with, because obviously I'm going to get some new pads, and if I overfill it now, then I'm only going to have to take it out again later. So moving on to bleeding the brakes now, and to do this we are going to use this Swedish penis enlarging pump. If you've not got one of those, you could just get on Amazon and order a vacuum pump. It's more or less exactly the same thing. Kieran's putting some brake fluid into the reservoir. We're just going to hit the minimum mark as I mentioned. That's what we're aiming at. Next job then is at the caliper end, and we've got the bleed nipple on the caliper, which we are fitting the pipe from the penis pump to, and then we've got a 10mm spanner, which if if I can get down here. We're going to crack off the nut. We're going to crack off. We're going to crack off that nut there.
In Russia?
No.
I'm good with geography.
Poland, I believe, although I'm sure somebody will tell us. So there we are, that's the nut cracked off there, and we've got fluid in the reservoir. So now we're going to pump on the vacuum pump, which should start to draw the fluid through the hose and start to fill up the caliper, all the while keeping an eye on the reservoir to make sure that the level does not fall much below minimum. Right, what we did there then was to hook up the vacuum pump, and while keeping the reservoir topped up, we cracked off the nut on the bleed nipple and then used the vacuum pump to pull the fluid from the reservoir through the system to refill the caliper. So now we've tightened back up the bleed nipple and the reservoir's at about minimum, and there's a good feel on the pedal, so we're more or less happy that that is good to go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to press down on the pedal, which pushes the pads against the disc, and then we're going to tighten up the two 12mm on the caliper. When I say we, I mean Kieran. Kieran's going to do that while I sit on my arse here. Oh, Kieran. He's famous now. He's a YouTuber, don't you know? With all that done then, we're going to put the little rubber and plastic piece back in the top of the fluid reservoir, put the top back on, bolt the reservoir back into place, and put the side panel back on. Well, there we are then. We've just put the reservoir and the side panel back on, so in theory that's the end of that job. We've just tested the rear brake on the driveway and it seems to be working fine, but I will go a little bit gingerly. Lols. Take it a little bit steady the first time I'm out riding to just make sure I'm really actually happy with that before I give it the beans. If you have fitted some new brake pads, obviously I didn't this time, but you might have done that. If you fitted some new brake pads, just make sure that you also go steady for the first 100
X amount of miles.
Insert miles here, about 100 miles, because they take a little bit of a while to bed in, so they might not be quite as good as you used to. Next on my list of jobs to do is to check the front calipers and the pads, because as I mentioned earlier, we are going on tour and I want to make sure that I can stop when we do that. So we're going to investigate that and get some pads ordered. So for now then, we'll say that that is the end of this video, and hopefully it was helpful. We always hope they're helpful. If they're not, then as ever we apologise profusely. All the usual stuff applies. You can like this video if it was helpful for you. You can subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And you can find us on Facebook, you can buy stickers and all the rest of it. So all that's down below, just go and have a look. And we shall see you in the next one. Ta-da! Cue the music.
What up? Nailed it.